Good evening, everybody. This is Kiana, and tonight we are talking about a very unsettling case coming out of Punta Gorda, Florida, in the United States of America. So, but before we do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Each subscriber actually helps move this video up in the algorithm. And I think it's important for us as a community and as a collective to actually support videos like this that are speaking about state crime and police brutality, because what that does is it brings transparency and accountability to those issues. So let's get into it. As you know, if you've been following the headlines, there is a story where an African American man named Elroy Clarke was unalived by law enforcement officers. So, from the beginning, what happened was Clark made a phone call to law enforcement, and he said that there was an unruly tenant living within his home, and that his tenant, I guess they weren't actually getting along. Maybe I didn't hear anything about the tenant not paying rent, but just I think that there was like some disagreements between the two. And so Clark decided that he didn't want his tenant to live in his home anymore. I think the tenant is actually his brother. I think that I caught a snippet of that come out in one of the videos, but I could be wrong. Like that has not been clarified. But at any rate, it does appear that the tenant might be Clark's brother. And so Clark called law enforcement and say, "Hey, I don't want this man to live in my home anymore. Can you please remove him?" So when law enforcement arrived to the scene, what they did was they ran Clark's name. And when they ran his name, allegedly there was a warrant out for Clark's arrest for trespass. Now it's debatable whether or not that this is true, and I'll tell you why. Because one, normally Americans in several states across the United States, really, a trespass is one of the, I think it's like a Class C misdemeanor. Even if it's a Class C misdemeanor, you can't be arrested for a misdemeanor unless you refuse to leave somebody's property. So let's say, for instance, you are on someone's property and before they ask you to leave, excuse me, you're on someone's property and they ask you to leave, and then maybe you don't leave, and then they call law enforcement. Well, when law enforcement comes to the scene, law enforcement has to direct you to leave. So the law enforcement would say, "Hey, you have a trespass warning, or we're trespassing you. You can no longer come on this property. If you come back on this property, then you are subject to arrest." And from the conversations that was happening within this span of time, it didn't seem as if that didn't seem like as if that the facts were it, it didn't seem as if that were the case. And Clark never mentions that he went onto someone's property illegally, and the police officers never reiterated or even expounded on that. But what the police officers did say is that Clark had an arrest warrant for trespass and failure to appear. So he had a court date probably for that trespass and did not appear. But this is allegedly, because again, Clark disputes that that is even true. Now, we also understand that there is usually no arrest for trespass. So even if a person does not appear for court, they're really not going to arrest you for trespass, because this is like a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter, it's a civil matter. Trespasses are civil. It doesn't actually reach the threshold into criminal unless you do something criminal while you're trespassing. Now, the officers do acknowledge that they had a previous, or the sheriff acknowledges that they had a previous run in with Clark, and that run in was, although there was some dispute and maybe some disagreements, that he never was violent in the past. And so, yeah, so there was a prior incident that they had with Clark, but he was never violent. And there is, so going back to the facts, so the officers notify Clark that he has a warrant out for his arrest. Clark disputes that he has a warrant out for his arrest. He says that he is not Clark, that he is another person. So he gives a different name. And it's a difficult name for me to pronounce because I really couldn't understand the name that he was saying. But again, it could be that Clark was going under a different name and no longer going under Elroy, and decided that he was actually feeling more comfortable under this new identity. That could be the case. But a a claim that is made in the video that is debatable is whether or not Clark was a sovereign citizen. Now, we understand what the sovereign citizen is. It's a person who don't, it's a group of people who are in the United States, and not only in the United States, but in other countries across the world, who don't believe that they are part of the government. They feel a group of what is known as sovereign citizens, that they're a group of tax protesters who, it doesn't really even actually describe sovereign citizens. Okay, so they believe that the courts have no jurisdiction over them, and that the use of procedures and loopholes can make one immune to the government laws and regulations. Okay, so I guess in essence, I think a sovereign citizen is a person who doesn't believe that court systems apply to them, and that legal rules and laws don't apply to them. It's something is strange, but at any rate, what I will say is this: I find it hard to believe that Clark is a sovereign citizen for a number of reasons. If you look at the house that he lives in, he's very wealthy. And reports indicate that Clark has several businesses. So I was reading some reports, and basically what these reports stated was that Clark was a businessman. So he had several businesses across Florida. He has a humongous house. You can tell that he is a wealthy person. He has several different cars in the parking lot, and all the cars in the parking lot has a license plate on the back. Now, a clarifier to understand, based on some things that I've been reading on that, is that people who believe in this phenomenon of sovereign citizens, they don't actually have license plates. Actually, they're against license plates. And if you ever watch videos, you always see them being stopped because they don't have license plates. So I find it hard to believe that actually Elroy was a sovereign citizen for a number of reasons. One, he has a property, and having a property that big means that you're going to be paying taxes. You're going to be putting money into the system, having businesses, legitimate businesses. They didn't say that his businesses were illegitimate. They were saying that his businesses were legitimate. Having businesses established means that you're doing paperwork with the government. And then you have several vehicles and you have license plates on them. All of these are antithetical to the sovereign citizen movement. I don't believe that Clark was a sovereign citizen. I think that this was propaganda put out by the US government to undermine this victim so that we as a community don't rally behind him. And I'm pretty sure, listen, ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to understand that right now within the United States is going after Black men. The United States has a bone to pick with Black men. And I'm not saying this to be divisive. I'm not saying this to race bait. I wish this were not the case. I really do. I wish that the United States had an amicable and cordial history and relationship with Black men. But every time that you turn on a video, you see that the United States is often pushing propaganda against Black Americans. And ladies and gentlemen, part of that propaganda is the notion that Black Americans are unable to perceive events properly, unable to know, unable to reason, that Black Americans are people who are suffering from mental illness. And ladies and gentlemen, what can we talk? Black people, dear Black people, can we please talk? When you feed into the narrative that your loved one has a mental illness when they do not, and when there isn't a large body of evidence pointing to that fact, what you do is you set your loved one up to experience what we see with Jordan Neely, what we see with Elroy Clarke, what we see with a number of Sonia Massey. You actually dig the grave for your loved one. Before you agree with authorities, so before you agree with authorities and before you agree with the government that your loved one is suffering from a mental illness, you need to ask all the critical questions. What is a mental illness? What are the signs of a particular disorder? Are there comorbidities to this, right? And could this be something entirely different? Could it be that the person is angry at the moment? Could it be that the person is emotional? Could it be the person is sad? Could it be that the person is scared? All of this together is often confused and misinterpreted as some form of mental disorder in Black Americans. And so, what did Elroy do wrong in this case? So, what he did wrong was that he charged at the officer, right? I mean, we could all agree that that is what he did wrong. But he's disputing the arrest. He's disputing that he even had a warrant out for his arrest. He's disputing that he's coming out and he's intransigent and and stating in the affirmative that he does not have a warrant out for his arrest. And it's hard to believe that he did have a warrant out for his arrest. Let's look at the facts around this particular case. This man looks like he's a multimillionaire, like he has a lot of money. And it wouldn't take anything for him to actually go to place himself within the police car, travel down to the police station with them, and get out within 30, 40 minutes. They're not going to keep him in jail for a trespass. They hardly arrest people for trespass in the United States. Trespass is a Class C misdemeanor. Oftentimes, when people are issued a trespass warning, they're let go. The only time that people are arrested for trespass is if they come back, again, to reiterate, if they come back onto the property that they have been trespassed from. And going back to the discussion that law enforcement officers had with Elroy, it didn't appear as if that were the case. All they stated was that he was, one, a sovereign citizen, which I'm pretty sure that he disputes. If they would have asked Elroy, "Are you A?" he probably would have disputed that. Now, I don't know because that hasn't came out yet, and we don't have a conversation. But until I see Elroy actually stating in a video that that is what he is, I'm not going to believe law enforcement, because we know that law enforcement officers in the United States often set up black men for crimes and try to discredit them. So, do I believe that Elroy is a sovereign citizen? No. And until you show me proof of him saying that, I don't believe that. Do I believe that Elroy had a warrant out for his arrest for trespass? No, I don't believe that. Elroy was shocked to hear that he had a warrant out for his arrest for trespass. And let's consider the facts. A person who has a warrant out for their arrest is not going to call law enforcement when they know that they have a warrant out for their arrest. It goes against all reason. When law enforcement arrived to the scene, Elroy was shocked that they were coming at him with this baseless allegation that he was that he had trespassed and that he had a warrant out for his arrest. Now, we are living in the digital age. Now, what does that mean for a case like this? That means that law enforcement officers can take a person and make arrest photos of them to undermine them, to discredit them, to make arrest photos to make it appear as if they've been arrested, and make photos of them to make it appear as if they're incarcerated, and they can attach any information on that. We're living in the age of AI where they're using people's voices, and unfortunately, like Joe Biden is a victim of this, where he's a victim of a deep fake, where people have taken his image and applied it to a voice that sounded like his and circulated that on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a very dangerous time where AI is being used to implicate people in crimes they did not commit. Again, what law enforcement officers can do is that they can actually take a photo of a person, make it appear as if they've been incarcerated, and attach any kind of information on that. And it's you, it's the victim against this information that law enforcement has. And who do you think is going to win? Again, this is really not about whether Elroy Clarke was Elroy Clarke. This is not about whether he was the name that he said that he was, or really Elroy Clarke. I think what this case is about is that you had a black man who sought uh, police intervention, and he relied on police to exercise and to deliver justice. And when that happened, or when he relied on law enforcement, they didn't deliver. They didn't help him. What they did was they marginalized him and treated him as the perpetrator. Now, again, I don't believe that Elroy Clarke had a warrant out for his arrest. I don't believe that. Although law enforcement, although we see that in this footage that they are saying that, again, Elroy is disputing that warrant is even valid or that even belongs to him, because he asked for them to actually run that against his credentials, and they don't do that. But even if, let's just say, even if what came back on the police screen matched the person in front of them, let's say, for instance, the person in front of them was Elroy Clarke, and that Elroy Clarke did have a warrant out for his arrest for trespass. Going back to the original statement and argument, don't you think that that wouldn't have been something protested? Let's think about this clearly. All again, to reiterate, and I'm reiterating this because it's important for us to think critically. This man is a multimillionaire. You can tell by his home. Like, he has, I think, a three-car garage. The home is huge, and there's several cars in the driveway. This man is a multimillionaire. It doesn't take anything for him to get into the car, go down to the police station, and bail himself out. They're not going to keep this man behind bars for a trespass warrant. This is a Class C misdemeanor. It's not a felony. And the fact that this is a Class C misdemeanor and not a felony makes me question whether or not that warrant is legitimate, and whether there's a larger issue at play here, whether law enforcement or someone sought to rip that man from his money, rip that man from his home. He's no longer living now. And lately, under the Biden Harris administration, all we've been hearing when we've been seeing these cases is that Black Americans are suffering from a mental illness. That's what we've been hearing, right? And ladies and gentlemen, that's not to say that there aren't mental illnesses in the Black community. There is people with mental health conditions in every community, in every community. But I think that what the United States is doing is it's weaponizing mental illness to unalive Black Americans, and doing so dangerously. The United States understands that once you say that a person has a mental illness, especially if they are Black, and this goes back to the slavery era, this is very indicative of what we've seen during the slavery era and what we've seen during Jim Crow. The United States understands that once you say that a Black person, once a white person says that a Black person has a mental illness, then all of that epistemology, all being able to reason, being able to know, is evaporated for the Black person. And that is transferred to the white person. So now the white person is the person of knowledge, the person of understanding, the person of reason, the person of rationale. And I just think it's very unfortunate, ladies and gentlemen, that Black Americans wake up. Wake up. I mean, where are all the woke lawyers? Where are all the woke scholars? Where are the woke people to call the United States out on this pattern and practice? This is a dangerous pattern and practice that the United States is doing. And it's time for the lawyers in the United States, the civil rights, where's the NAACP? Oftentimes the NAACP is so blinded by the Biden Harris administration and putting the Democrats into office that it has lost sight of the harm that is happening to the Black American community. And one of the harms is weaponizing mental illness to unalive Black Americans. It's in plain sight. To reiterate, even if he had a mental illness, even if that were the case, in many instances, that is not justification to unalive the person. Now, in this situation, Clarke was combative. We can't disagree with that. But again, he disputes that there is an arrest warrant. He disputes the validity of that arrest warrant. Did that give him, is that justification for him to charge at the officer? No. But we understand that that officer that actually unalived him knew what he did was wrong, because you could see his reaction. He cried, and I think he was almost put up to it, like someone told him to do it. I mean, watch that video and his reaction. He was like, the officer is saying that he didn't want to do it, as if someone put him up to it. There is something very unsettling going on in the United States that's dealing with Black people and law enforcement. And it's something that we should be very critical of. Again, Clarke, he didn't have any firearms on his person. Law enforcement said that he was never violent before. So this is just a case that we really, really need to keep our attention on. Thank you for listening. I'm Kiana Canada. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.